Hello and welcome to another astrology video. I just want to take this time to talk about Venus in Aries. I'm going to start describing Venus through signs, and I thought this time around I would try to do Venus through one sign at a time because it's less challenging, I guess. So let me just start by describing what Venus is in general. For those of you who don't know, but I'm guessing a lot of you are beginners, so you may not know. Venus stands for basically, as the name would suggest, everything feminine, sensual, pleasure-loving, everything that you can enjoy through the five senses. And so it's the love goddess. It represents, in a person's horoscope, it represents what they enjoy. It can mean anything from hobbies to what you take pleasure in general, in every area of life. Your favorite foods, your favorite art works, your favorite form of art, your favorite pastimes, your favorite type of literature. Like, all of these things can actually be, to a great extent, influenced by Venus. And also, it represents a person's beauty ideal. It represents a person's idea of beauty in general, whether it's like the perfect interior decoration or the perfect, I don't know, the favorite animals, even favorite pets and everything. But especially when it comes to feminine ideal, it represents the ideal feminine beauty of a person. Whether this person is male or female, everybody has a feminine ideal. So in a woman's chart, it can show, for instance, that if you have a Venus opposite your ascendant, and I've seen this with some people, you can show signs of insecurity, not necessarily because you are objectively unattractive, but because your ideal of what a woman should look like is the complete opposite of your particular physical beauty type. So, yeah, it can be important like that. And also, of course, in a man's chart, it shows the ideal physical beauty in a woman. So if a man has, for instance, his Venus conjunct a woman's rising, it's a strong sign of attraction, because the rising sign represents the way you present yourself to the world. It shows personality, so it shows basic mannerisms and things, but it can also influence literal physical appearance, whether it's your natural God-given appearance or the way that you choose to dress up and color your hair and, work out, not work out, things like that. The ascendant shows all of those things. So when a man's Venus is conjunct a woman's ascendant, she basically embodies his Venus. Okay? So also Venus can have something to do with money, of course, because again, Venus being the natural ruling planet of Taurus and Libra, but especially Taurus, that is the basic Venus energy. It's the earthy, sensual, everything has to be filtered through the five senses sort of thing. So it has to do with money as well, and possessions, physical possessions. Your attitude to money and finances, and also your ability to accumulate wealth to some extent. Venus also generally shows the spouse. I know that in tropical astrology, there is this difference being made between a man's moon sign and a man's Venus sign. If I remember correctly, you would find a lot of articles that said, well, the moon sign actually represents the kind of woman that a man wants to marry, and Venus represents the kind of woman that a man is physically attracted to. Well, that doesn't exist in the Vedic perspective, and I tend to look at it from the Vedic perspective in my videos. I mostly focus on Vedic interpretations and sidereal zodiac. So, in Vedic perspective, there is no such thing as like the moon representing the wife. The moon represents the mind and personality of a person, regardless of the person's gender. So, of course, the moon in synastry is also very important, but not in the same way that you would understand it from tropical astrology. So, Venus actually in a man's chart represents the wife, but even in a woman's chart, it can give indication to the spouse, because Venus in general naturally rules the 7th house. So that means that it gives some hint as to what the person's spouse is going to be, or the kind of people that this person is attracted to. So there it is. So I'm just gonna start to describe Venus in Aries now. Aries, of course, like I've said before, I'm not sure if I've said it before, but I have made a video describing Mars in Aries. You could also check that, because I've described Aries in that, I'm pretty sure. But if not, I could just say a few things. Aries is cardinal fire, which means all of the cardinal signs are the starters of the initiators, of the pioneers, the active people. So each element has a cardinal sign, and Aries is fire's cardinal sign, and especially this combination between it is the being fire and cardinal makes it very aggressive and very energetic and very proactive and self-centered. It corresponds psychologically, I mean, to the spiritual level of a small child or a toddler up to the age of 2.5, 3. When a child is all me. And so they're very, on the one hand, selfish, but then on the other hand, very energetic and can be overly optimistic, and also courageous and adventurous, and always wanting to be first. I think this is an important thing to mention about Aries, because more than any other sign, this sign is very self-assertive. So when you have like a person, it doesn't have to be someone who has Sun in Aries, but any planet in Aries will show an area where this person acts assertively. So, if you have like Venus in Aries, that means that your Venus is filtered through the Aries energy, which is kind of a bit of a contradiction in terms almost, because Venus is the feminine ideal and Mars is the masculine ideal. Romantically, of course, these two planets show, on the one hand, you have Venus showing affection and romantic love, and you have Mars showing passion and sex and physical love and all of that. So, but when you have like Venus in Aries, it tends to show that a person's like anima, if you are familiar with that term, it comes from Jung, and it shows like basically the female side of a person. The theory is that both men and women have a feminine side. So the Venus and the moon in a person's chart show the anima of a person. So they will show, in a man's, of course, in a man's chart, oftentimes that translates into what he wants the women in his life to be like, but it not necessarily means that, especially in today's world when it's starting to become, or it's already has become much easier for a man to express feminine traits or to express his feminine side. I'm not necessarily talking about people who are transgender or anything like that, but just in terms of, like, the admitting wanting romance or being soft and cuddly, or I don't know, doing traditionally, expressing his feminine side, being emotional and all that. So yes, this Venus in Aries can show, in the most literal translation, can be love of war, for instance, because Mars rules war, and it rules, or not Mars, yes, Mars and Aries, because Aries is governed by Mars. So you have love, your love filter goes through Aries, which means that you love traditionally Aryan things, like sports, like competitions of all kinds. It really depends on the house placement, because the sign shows how a planet will express its energy, and the house shows where. So which area of life that energy will be expressed through. For instance, if you have Venus in Aries in the, let's say, 6th house, the 6th house is ruled by Virgo. It's the house of medical science, the house of day-to-day mundane work. It literally shows your co-workers or your work environment, but also mainly it is ruled by Virgo, so it rules everything to do with medical science, natural sciences, fields like chemistry, biology, anything, any sub-level, any sub-field of medicine. So you could have, instead of a person who has, let's say, so instead of interpreting Venus in Aries always as someone who is very physically competitive and very combative and always striving to, be first in a sport or be outwardly aggressive, you could have someone who has Venus in Aries in the 6th house, who instead will choose to compete in intellectual ways, because the 6th house is mostly an intellectual house. It's ruled by Mercury. So you could instead have someone who wants to be the best doctor, or wants to be first in medical school, or they want to be the best chemist, or whatever. You get the general idea. Or you could just have someone who wants to find the perfect healthy lifestyle and diet. So back to Aries and Venus, right? So Venus in Aries, on the one hand, shows love of sport. Yes, regardless of what you are doing for a living, if you have Venus in Aries, it's quite safe to say that you will love physical activity, that you will like to get your hands dirty every now and then, that you love to be assertive. You need, to some extent, especially as a woman, you need to stay physically active in order to be happy. Because Venus shows what you enjoy most in life, basically. It's not like Mars, it's not like passion, what drives you, really, but it's the thing that keeps you going, basically, because it's like the little things that you cannot live without, and that make life worthwhile. Venus, again, Venus in Aries can show love in music, for instance. They can show a love for darker kind of music, or, rock music. Let me think. Or, I don't know, just not necessarily rock, but like dark jazz, or, anything that can be in any way related to a Mars theme. So things to do with fights, and so rap music, again, could be a great outlet for Venus in Aries. Things that have to do with, the underdog, or having to fight your way up, or, struggles, survival, things like that. These are all Aries themes. So, let me think. Okay. Venus in Aries also, like I have mentioned, influences a person's beauty ideal. Now, Aries being basically the archetype of the warrior, of the ideal, masculine, hyper-masculine man, it will influence Venus in a weird way, not in a traditionally feminine way. Meaning, especially in a woman's chart, a woman will strive to be fit with this placement generally, because the feminine ideal here leans towards something like, Xena the warrior princess, or Gal Gadot in Wonder Woman. Someone like that, a woman that is, on the one hand, of course, physically beautiful, but also very strong and healthy looking, and very athletic, and looks like she could handle herself well in a combat. That is pretty much the beauty ideal here. It's, warrior princess kind. Or another ideal could be not so in your face kind of warrior woman. Think of Scarlett O'Hara, the character from Gone with the Wind. To me, that is possibly one of the most typical Aries personalities ever, that I personally have ever come across, real or imaginary. Like, she is basically the embodiment of an Aries woman. Very selfish, very, at least partly outspoken, selfish, impatient, impulsive, on the negative side, can be very destructive and very ruthless in pursuing her desires and her goals. But on the positive side, very much a fighter, having this never say die attitude, and basically a survivor. That's what Aries is about. Aries will never give up. Like, people who have at least one planet in Aries, these are the people that I personally think are probably least likely to become depressed, because they just accept the fact that life is about the struggle. It's about fighting. They love to fight. Even if they may not, say it outwardly, they need fights. They need to struggle. They need to constantly meet challenges and overcome them. That is what, drives them. But, okay, I digress. So that is the feminine ideal, basically. And also, even when you're talking just strictly physical feature-wise, the feminine ideal will tend to probably about average in height, because Mars is not necessarily known for height. That's Jupiter. So ideally average in height, athletic to some extent, or if not athletic, at least slim and rather wiry. Complexion-wise and coloring-wise, they tend towards the dark side. So dark hair, dark skin, dark eyes, either one of those or all of them. That's pretty much the Venus in Aries beauty ideal. So I think Gal Gadot is a very good example, but also Vivian Leigh, the actress who played Scarlett O'Hara, I think is actually very Aryan looking. Aries tend to have, if you see it on the rising at least, they tend to have strong features, especially a prominent nose and arched eyebrows and pointy chins. Pretty much all the features that you would read about as depicting a strong personality or strong character traits in face reading technologies, sciences. Those are pretty much the Aries traits. Okay, what else have I got here? Also, in terms of loving sports, they don't just love any sports. They tend to not be very good at team sports, because Aries is all about being, not necessarily the center of attention, but being at the forefront, or being the leader, or being the one that stands out. So they will not really enjoy teamwork that much in general, regardless of the area of life. So their favorite sports actually might be combat sports like karate, boxing, kickboxing, the works, or they could be just very typically solitary sports where they just set goals that they have to overcome, like swimming or running, or just, any pure competitive activity. That is an Aries kind of field. Also, okay, so in terms of romance, Venus in Aries will tend to be the type that falls in love quite quickly, but finds it hard to stay interested for a very long time, because this is a fire sign and they need to feel challenged in romance. Ideally, they would want, spontaneity, they would want adventure in romance, so they would generally would love, the kind of partner that surprises them with a weekend abroad or something, or surprise, I don't know, tickets to a show or things like that, because it is a very active sign that, loves challenges and loves to have adventures and live in the present. So, they tend to be very passionate, but especially with the women who have this position, as a woman, Venus shows the way that you love, actually as a man as well. But especially as a woman, it would possibly be a bit strange from a traditional point of view, because these women tend to be go-getters. So they may actually end up chasing a guy that they like, much like Scarlett O'Hara, actually. These are not the kind of women that just sit around and wait for things to happen, because Aries is possibly the most proactive sign in the zodiac. So, they tend to be out there, like in your face, aggressive. Not necessarily aggressive, but definitely passionate. Whether a man is comfortable with that or not, of course, depends on his placements. But generally, they tend to be very honest and they tend to be loyal, but they can go astray because they are pretty much a selfish, immature sign. They can be, at least. Best case scenario, or at its most evolved level, Aries can be a romantic, very idealistic sign. You know, the men with this placement will love to have that kind of knight in shining armor kind of aura for their woman, or that they will find that kind of ideal pleasing of being the traditional hero of the relationship, with, I don't know, saving the woman. Actually, maybe not so much for a man, maybe only for a woman. A woman will like that kind of romance. A man, maybe, if he has Mars in Aries, he would be more prone to that. Not sure if Venus in Aries would give the same results. So, okay, I think that's about it, the general idea. Also, I have prepared a few examples, as usual. Now, don't get discouraged. The first one is Adolf Hitler. Actually, I picked this one out because I think he is a very, very good example of how Venus in Aries can go bad. In his case, actually, it's not just Venus in Aries, and of course you have to bear this in mind generally, that it's not just about one particular placement, it's about all of the placements and aspects in a chart and how they interact. So that's why it's never super easy to interpret a chart. But sometimes when aspects gather together in one direction, you can start to see a pattern and see, okay, this person will show negative traits. And with Hitler, it's so obvious, I think, because first of all, I should have mentioned this from the start. Venus in Aries, with all its, despite its positive sides, is not a very comfortable placement, basically, because Venus naturally is ruling Taurus, which is a feminine earth sign, and Aries is a masculine fire sign. So being in fire and being in Aries is not a comfortable placement because there's a natural dichotomy there. And so Venus is actually stressed in this particular sign to some extent. So if you have, like in his case, you have Venus conjunct Mars, it basically shows not just Venus conjunct Mars, but Venus conjunct Mars in Aries. It clearly shows that the Mars energy is completely overpowering Venus. So instead of having, what could have been a fiery, passionate, idealistic, let's say peace militant, could have been one outcome, you have a warmonger, right? Because you have the love of war here. You definitely, that is like one of the literal translations, because Aries shows war or conflict and Venus shows love. And this is where, and especially in his chart, he has not just Venus and Mars, but he has Venus, Mars, Sun, Mercury, all in Aries and all in the 7th house. And this is, again, very important to emphasize because the 7th house shows an area that oftentimes gets projected onto others. And people who have planets in the 7th house can be very, very persuasive, can be very almost seductive to an extent, because the 7th house is basically, these people can almost mirror the person in front of them, whether that is an actual person or an audience, and show them what they want to see. That's how they use the whole projection thing. And I think with Hitler it's obvious, because the man used I think he definitely knew how to manipulate the masses and tell them exactly what they wanted to hear, and get them to actually act for him in a way. That was the deviousness of it all. And especially with Mercury there, it shows a great, or how do you put it? Like a great speaker. That's what it shows. Especially in Aries, a very aggressive, persuasive, assertive speaker. And of course, basically, that's how, in large part, that's how he ended up in power, because of his persuasive speeches. And yeah, so this is a pretty negative example. But of course, it doesn't mean anything. Of course, there are tons of other placements in a chart. Having one Venus in a sign is not going to make you crazy or anything. So, another great example, Lana Del Rey. I was so excited when I saw this, because actually just as I was starting to gather some ideas for this recording, I was thinking, wouldn't it be funny if Lana Del Rey had Venus in the 1st house in Aries, because she really embodies, I think, another kind of Aries beauty ideal. She is another kind in the sense that she's not exactly the warrior archetype, but she does project that kind of a dark, sultry, kind of sexy aura. And of course, Aries, being governed by Mars, tends to be quite sexual, and tends to have that kind of a magnetism to it. And her aesthetic appearance, the long dark hair, the large dark eyes, and the deep voice, at least when she's singing, are very Aries, And so she has Venus conjunct, tightly conjunct her rising in Aries, and also has Saturn opposite this conjunction, which actually explains her height and her physique overall. It actually gives, Saturn being a dark, gloomy kind of energy would absolutely complete her overall, aura, because she has this kind of dark, sings about death sort of thing, and almost laughs about death, and seems to be almost at least the character, and the aura that she projects, her artistic persona is, kind of like a dark Aries, and her physique is perfectly explained by these placements. Saturn tends to give a elongated physique, long face, long thin limbs, above average height, and definitely seems to work for her. So, also, another example, Mark Zuckerberg. He has Leo rising, Sun conjunct Venus in the 8th house. Now, the 8th house is really interesting, because It rules joint ventures, joint capital transactions. It rules large-scale enterprises. It rules anything that has to do sticking your nose into other people's affairs, or making money out of secrets, or having to do with dark hidden political interests, or basically being kind of like a power behind the scene. This is everything 8th house. And of course, I am not trying to say anything. All I'm saying is, in light of recent events, this is a very interesting astrological placement. Because, having Sun there, conjunct Venus in the 8th house, it's a great emphasis that this person wants to assert himself in 8th house matters. Enough said. Okay, Daniel Day-Lewis. Just a very nice, clear example. Sun conjunct Venus in the 5th house. 5th house, of course, rules drama and theater. So, clearly the man is driven to assert himself in drama and theater. Perfectly explained by Sun conjunct Venus in Aries and the 5th house. Jackie Chan, another clean example. Venus in Aries in the 11th house. 11th house has to do with massive gains to some extent. It shows gains through your own efforts, but it also shows anything to do with large audiences. It shows your friends, the larger groups you pertain to, and just large groups of people. And it's kind of fitting because he has Venus and Aries in the 11th house. That basically means large groups of people know him for Venus in Aries, which explains all of his action movies and focusing on combats in movies. Another little example, Iggy Azalea. Unfortunately, birth time unknown, so the house placement cannot be known, but she does have Venus in Aries, so which is very, very fitting for someone who wants to be a rapper, I think, especially as a musical genre, because it has to do with aggression, it has to do with, making it to the top, and I think with her style, it's very obvious. So that's all I've had to say. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope I will get to make another video really soon, and it will be for Venus in Taurus. Okay, so thank you.